There are places on the map that do not officially exist, bases with no names on public charts, runways that appear on no civilian directory. In April 1990, a British crew flying a routine red flag exercise made a fuel miscalculation over the Nevada desert. What happened next would not be officially discussed for over 2 decades. In the mid-1970s, the United States Air Force had a problem. Soviet air defenses were becoming extraordinarily capable. Surface-to-air missile systems, radar networks, interceptor aircraft, layered, overlapping, designed to make any attacking aircraft's life brutally short. The Americans had seen what these systems could do in the 1973 Arab-Israeli War. They did not like what they saw. The answer, developed in extreme secrecy inside Lockheed's famous Skunk Works facility, was something that had never existed before. An aircraft with a radar cross-section so small it was essentially invisible to every detection system then in existence. Not smaller than other aircraft, genuinely, radically, almost impossibly small. The radar return of a large bird, a steel marble, an eagle's eyeball. They called it the F-117 Nighthawk, and they hid it in the Nevada desert. Tonopah Test Range Airport sat in the middle of nowhere, roughly 200 miles northwest of Las Vegas. It had been used for various classified programs since the 1950s. It was surrounded by restricted airspace. It appeared on no public maps. The workers who maintained it were bussed in from Las Vegas on Monday mornings and bussed back on Friday evenings. Their employer listed on their payslips simply as a defense contractor. Their families were told they worked on electronics. Nothing more. The F-117 flew only at night. Always. Its angular black fuselage had been designed to scatter radar energy in every direction except back toward the transmitter. But that geometry, those flat, faceted surfaces, and the strange, serrated edges, were visually distinctive enough that daylight operations were considered too risky. Satellites passed overhead on known schedules. The aircraft moved between hangars before dawn. Ground crews wore night vision equipment. The program was so secret that when an F-117 crashed in the California mountains in 1986, the Air Force recovered every piece of wreckage under armed guard, replaced the soil, and reseeded the vegetation. Locals who had seen something were quietly discouraged from discussing it. By 1988, the program was partially acknowledged. Officially, at least, the aircraft existed. But Tonopah remained off-limits, its daily operations still wrapped in layers of classification that most NATO allies had never been cleared to see. In April 1990, that was still very much the case. And nobody had told squadron leader Wally Grout. Red Flag was, by 1990, the most demanding air combat training exercise in the world. Held several times a year at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, it brought together aircrew from across the American military and their closest allies for 2 weeks of simulated warfare over 15,000 square miles of restricted airspace. The idea was simple and brutal. Give pilots their first 10 combat missions in training before anyone tried to kill them in earnest. Statistics had shown those first 10 missions were when pilots died. Red Flag was designed to change the statistics. Squadron leader Wally Grout was approaching his 40th birthday when he arrived at Nellis in April 1990. He was an experienced navigator, a man who had flown the Vulcan bomber earlier in his career before crossing over to the Tornado GR1 in January 1982. He had 440 hours on type. He was, by any measure, exactly the kind of steady, experienced crew member you wanted leading a complex package into contested airspace. After just 4 missions into the exercise, Grout and his pilot were selected as lead crew for the package on April the 9th. It was a significant responsibility. The lead crew planned the mission, coordinated the formation, and went in first. The target was Talicha Peak, a full-scale replica of a Soviet military airfield built on the Nevada ranges specifically for Red Flag. It was modeled on a real Warsaw Pact installation. The attack profile called for a low-level penetration, threading through simulated Soviet air defenses at high speed and low altitude, then dropping 2 inert 1,000-pound bombs using a loft maneuver. Standard Cold War tornado business. The kind of mission RAF Germany crews had been rehearsing for years against the real thing, if the real thing ever came. All red flag aircraft carried a telemetry pod, a data transmission system that fed real-time position and performance information back to the exercise controllers at Nellis. Like Formula One cars broadcasting telemetry to the pit wall, every aircraft in the package could be tracked on a large screen in the control room. Controllers, instructors, and visiting observers could watch the entire exercise unfold in real time. It meant that when things went wrong, everyone knew immediately. The mission began normally. Grout and his pilot led the formation out of Nellis, dropped to low level, and began threading through the exercise defenses toward Talicha Peak. The desert floor flashed past beneath them. The telemetry pod broadcast their position faithfully back to Nellis. Everything was, in the language of aviators, nominal. Then Grout checked the fuel. The Tornado GR1's fuel system was, in the polite assessment of those who flew it, not its most user-friendly feature. The front cockpit had a combined fuel gauge that gave total quantity but limited information about distribution between tanks. The rear cockpit, where navigators sat, had a simple digital readout of total fuel, with no indication of where that fuel physically was, or whether all of it was actually accessible to the engines. A transfer valve that failed to open could trap fuel in a tank, showing on the gauge as available while being entirely unreachable. Grout noticed the numbers were not quite where they should be. He mentioned it to his pilot. They discussed it. There had been a minor fuel anomaly flagged before departure, a transfer valve that had seemed slightly reluctant. They had pressed on. They were the lead crew. The adrenaline of leading a complex package, the professional instinct to complete the task, the awareness that the entire formation was depending on them, all of it pushed against the rational calculation that said something was wrong. They completed the attack. Bombs gone. Formation turning for home. Then the fuel numbers made the decision for them. They did not have enough to reach Nellis. Grout pulled out the map. When a crew declares an emergency over the Nevada ranges, the standing guidance is straightforward. Divert to the nearest suitable airfield. Do not attempt to fly over Groom Lake, the even more classified installation to the southeast, home of the U-2 and SR-71 programs. Find somewhere reachable. Land. Sort it out on the ground. The nearest suitable runway was Tonopah. Grout gave his pilot the heading. Simultaneously, they transmitted to Red Flag Control that they were diverting with an emergency. The telemetry pod had almost certainly already shown the controllers what was happening. The aircraft's track deviating from the planned route, the altitude and speed consistent with a crew working a problem rather than flying a mission. The radio response was immediate and unusual. Red Flag Control. Why do you need to go there? You cannot go there. What exactly is wrong with your aircraft? Why can't you go to Indian Springs? Indian Springs was another airfield, further away, but unclassified. The controllers were not asking out of curiosity. They were stalling, buying time. Trying to find any alternative that did not involve a British aircrew landing at the most sensitive military installation in the United States. Then their own detachment commander came on the radio asking the same questions. Grout's answer was the same each time. They had a fuel emergency. Tonopah was the nearest airfield. Under the rules of aviation and the rules of Red Flag, a crew with a declared emergency went to the nearest suitable runway. That was not a request. It was not a negotiation. It was the rule. They landed at Tonopah. The runway was long and well maintained. The facilities for a base that officially did not exist were surprisingly substantial. Ground crew appeared. American, professional, entirely unsurprised by the arrival of a British Tornado, which suggested that diversions to Tonopah, while rare, were not entirely unprecedented in the institutional memory of the people who worked there. Grout and his pilot were received correctly and professionally. Nobody was hostile. Nobody was panicked. But the atmosphere had a particular quality: the careful, managed neutrality of people who were very good at not answering questions. Grout, being a navigator and therefore a man accustomed to paying attention to his surroundings, paid attention to his surroundings. The hangars were large, larger than necessary for conventional aircraft operations. Their doors faced away from the likely angle of any passing satellite. There were vehicles moving in patterns that suggested scheduled operations rather than maintenance. And in the distance, during the hours they spent on the ground waiting for the engineers to inspect the fuel system and clear the aircraft for departure, there were sounds. Engine sounds. Not the familiar noise of conventional jets. Something with a different acoustic signature. Higher. Stranger. Grout approached one of the guards. He had a theory, and he decided to test it with the kind of indirect question that a man approaching 40 who has spent his career around classified programs learns to use. I said to a guard, "I suppose you have to wait until the surveillance satellites are clear before you fly the F-117? His response was standard USAF. "I do not know what you're talking about, sir." Squadron leader Wally Grout, Tornado Boys, Ian Hall. The guard's non-answer was, of course, itself an answer. No one at a base that had nothing to hide responds to a casual question about aircraft with a formal denial. The architecture of the response, the precise, trained, institutional blankness, was as informative as a confession. Grout said nothing further. He was a professional. He understood classification. He had spent his career operating inside it. Whatever was here, it was not his program and not his secret to carry home. The engineers completed their inspection. The transfer valve, as Grout had suspected, had indeed failed to open correctly. The fuel that had appeared unavailable was physically present. It simply had not been transferring. The aircraft was serviceable. They were cleared to depart. Before they left, someone at Tonopah made a decision that said everything about the kind of base it was and the kind of people who ran it. When Grout walked back to the Tornado, he stopped. On each side of the tail fin, applied with the precision of a professional stencil, was the silhouette of an aircraft. Angular, faceted, unmistakable in its geometry to anyone who had seen the handful of official photographs released 2 years earlier when the program was first formally acknowledged. An F-117 Nighthawk. Beneath it, in clean block letters, "Don't ask." Grout stood there for a moment looking at it. Then he got in the aircraft and flew back to Nellis. The sticker remained on the fin. There are photographs of it. The Tornado GR1, tail decorated with its unexpected souvenir, looking slightly incongruous on the Nellis ramp among the F-15s and F-16s. The sticker was not removed immediately. It stayed long enough to be photographed, long enough to be seen by the other red flag participants, long enough to communicate precisely what the Americans intended it to communicate. We know you were there. We know what you saw. We know you are professional enough to understand what that means. Don't ask. The debriefing at Nellis was, by all accounts, thorough. The fuel management failure was examined carefully. Grout was honest in his assessment. They had pressed on with a known anomaly, driven by the adrenaline of leading the package, by the professional pressure to complete the task. In peacetime, that was survivable. In real war, pressing on with a fuel problem at low level over denied territory was the kind of decision that did not come with a second chance. It was a lesson that would matter. 9 months later, RAF Tornado GR1s would be doing exactly this. Low-level attacks over denied territory, at night against real defenses, in the opening hours of Operation Desert Storm. Several of the crews who flew those missions had trained at Red Flag. Some had flown the same Nevada ranges, the same Tolicus, Harpeak replica, the same profiles that Grout had led on April 9th. The fuel lesson stayed with Grout. He wrote about it honestly, years later, in the book Tornado Boys. Not with embarrassment, but with the clear-eyed assessment of a professional who understood the difference between the decision that felt right in the moment and the decision that was correct on examination. Squadron Leader Wally Grout, Tornado Boys. All very well in peacetime to press on, but what about real war? The F-117, for its part, had its public debut at the Nellis air show just months after Grout's unscheduled visit. Its angular black shape finally shown openly to the world it had been hiding from for nearly a decade. Within a year, it would be flying combat missions over Baghdad, doing exactly what it had been designed to do, from exactly the kind of classified program that Grout had glimpsed from the edge of a runway in the Nevada desert. And somewhere in the RAF, on the paperwork of an April 1990 red flag sortie, there is a fuel emergency declaration, a diversion record, a maintenance log noting a faulty transfer valve, inspected and cleared at a USAF facility whose name appears in the official record without comment or annotation. Professional, precise, saying everything by saying nothing. There are stories in aviation that never get a formal debrief. No official report, no press release, no acknowledgement, just a silhouette on a tail fin. And two words that contain a complete education in the etiquette of classified programs. Don't ask.